Grover Jackson, I think, changed the way the world makes guitars, the way the world buys guitars. As far as I know, Jackson Charvel was the first one-of-a-kind, tailored, manufactured guitar of that era. I mean, and he did it with a bunch of 21-year-old kids. I mean, he proved it could be done, and he did it with a bunch of 21-year-old kids.
And then about 8 months after that, we finally started making some necks. And so the natural progression was to put the necks and the bodies together. Somewhere around early 1979, don't remember exactly what month, that's when Mike Eldred and a guy named Don Fox came to work for me. At that point, it was just me by myself. The two employees that worked for Charvel Guitar Repair quit when I bought the business. So it was me by myself. And Mike came in and Don Fox came in, and we started making a few guitars and still selling parts. Our primary business was as a parts supplier to a company called Mighty Mite and DiMarzio. And we started making a few guitars. And from the relationships that I had with Veneman Music, which was a large retailer at the time, and Guitar Center, and Sam Ash from Anvil, I had these relationships with these people. We were able to sell a few guitars to some big retailers, and that was really the beginning.
Seeing Eddie Van Halen and Alan Holdsworth playing together in Grover's office was pretty cool.
Well, Grover gave me the opportunity in the guitar business. I came from a woodworking background, cabinet making, furniture making, and I wanted to learn guitars, and he gave me that opportunity. If it wasn't for Grover, I don't think I'd be in this business today. I mean, he gave me my shot.
Well, in 1977, I was working for the Anvil Case Company, and ended up leaving that company and went to work for Fred Wallachy at Westwood Music, which didn't last very long. And in that period of time, I decided I wanted to go back to being a guitar player. And there was a small guitar repair shop in Azusa called Charvel Guitar Repair, and they had some bodies and necks for sale. And so I went by to buy a body and a neck, and I was going to put a guitar together. I had already been building guitars prior to that down south, and so I went by and had lunch with this guy, and he was telling me that he was going to have to go bankrupt because his business was going so poorly, and I was out of a job, didn't know what I was going to do. So a week or two later, I went back and proposed that I come to work with him and see if I couldn't help him save his business. And we operated like that from late '77 until the fall of 1978, at which point he decided he'd had enough and wanted out. This was a guitar repair shop with 2 employees, a little small place. And in that period of time, we had moved from Azusa out to Glendora. Actually, San Dimas, I'm sorry. So In the fall of '78, he decided he wanted to go out of business, and I said, well, that's fine, except that I've put a year of my life in here, and I think I can still save this. So I bought the business, this guitar repair shop, Charvel Guitar Repair, from him.
I used to go and see a bunch of bands play up in LA, and I went up, and a friend of mine called me up and he says, you got to go see this guitar player. And so we went up to LA, and it was Van Halen, and they were playing Gazzarri's, and they were doing, like, 4 sets a night and a whole bit, and so we'd talk to Ed in between, the sets and stuff, and we would always go up and watch their band play. And they were playing the Whiskey one time, and he shows up. He had already done modifications to like a '64 Stratocaster, but he showed up one night with this guitar that was all, black and white striped and everything. And I said, man, where did you get that? And he said, I got it from Charvel's Manufacturing up in San Dimas. And he actually gave me the phone number. And so I wanted to get a guitar made, and so I called them up, and I actually, asked about the process of ordering a guitar, and then drove up there one night, and Grover was working in this. It was like this little industrial warehouse thing, and it was like about 9 o'clock at night, and Grover was way in the back by himself, just a light on a drill press or a mill or something, and he was milling out a bridge or something. And I ordered the guitar from Grover, and that's the first time I met him.
And how old were you then?
I was, I think, about 18. Yeah, I was about 18.
And then
Well, there's sort of several different early days. The really early days were very crazy because we were just constantly broke. And it was all passion and not much business sense. And in the early days, we sold anything we could to anybody we could just to stay alive. And then later, as I kind of feel like we were at one of those a nexus where things, the universe kind of came together. I mean, I always like to say that, I don't know if the Beatles, if they'd have been born in Buenos Aires, would have ever been the Beatles. And in the early 80s, up until the early 80s, there had not been a very vibrant local music scene in LA. And then something happened in the early 80s where you had this tremendous crush of talent, and record companies decided that they had an interest in it, and so it really blossomed. And just in the span of 2 or 3 years, things really went bananas. And you had Quiet Riot and Van Halen and Snow, which Carlos Cavazo was in, and a bunch of bands. George Lynch had a band called The Boys, and so there was a whole bunch of really great guitar players around town, great music going on, and record companies kind of caught fire. And all of these guitar players were playing a very aggressive kind of style of music, and we happened to have, because I had played heavy metal kind of music earlier, we had a kind of an affinity for what those guys were looking for in a guitar. And there wasn't really anybody else in town doing what we were doing. So we were just in the right place at the right time, doing the right stuff.
Well, I was trying to pay the guitar off, and so I kept driving. Every time I got some money, I would drive up there and I would give them some money, and they'd mark off on the sheet, how much I paid and everything. And this went on for about a year, and finally I just asked them, because I was working at a job that was the hours were from noon to 9 o'clock at night or something like that, and I was looking for a job that I could go and play with a band at night. So I had asked him, I said, are you hiring people, and could I get a job here? And he tried to talk me out of it. He said, you don't want to work here, and it'll ruin your hands, for a guitar player, this isn't a good job. So anyways, he hired me, and I went there, and it was just, it was really cool, for the first, day. In the beginning, it was Grover, his wife Joanne at the time, and myself, and then Don Fox was a guy that he hired about the same time, I think, somewhere around there. and they had a couple guys that would come and go from when Wayne was doing like a lot of repairs in there, and so Wayne had people who did refinishing and stuff, and so those guys would come in every once in a while and kind of help out. And they were almost like contractors. Grover would hire them to come in and do stuff, but the main people was myself, Grover, Joanne, and Don Fox were at the beginning of it. And I remember the first day I was there, he had me glue up some ash body blanks, and there was a stack of them, and what you had to do is you had to take the ash blanks, and you had to mill them, get them flat on both sides, and then you had to put glue on them, and then you had to put them in pipe clamps and clamp them down. And I did, I think probably maybe 20, 25 of those. And the first day I was there, the next day I came in, and Grover, he goes, well, how'd you do? And I go, good, I did really good. I got like 25 of them done. He goes, let me see. And he grabbed one and he unclamped it, and he just took the blank and he just threw it on the ground, and it just split right down the seam, right where the glue line was. And then he just kind of said, let me show you how to do it. And all of them were, I had to redo them all, and he showed me how to crank them down. You had to crank them down really hard, and I remember my arms really hurting after that night. But I learned, and that's kind of how Grover would teach people, to build stuff. You learn by making a mistake, and as long as you didn't make the mistake twice, you were cool,
There's a lot to say about Grover. There's stories I've heard secondhand. There's stories I've seen. It wasn't unlike Grover to work late into the night and spend the night in his car and be there first thing in the morning to let everybody in. I've heard stories of Grover and Joanne when they were first starting out, spending the night with the wood during the Santa Anas to keep the moisture up. Long story short, I don't think Grover Jackson was ever the kind of guy that would expect you to do something and work hard when he hadn't done it himself. I mean, he put in the effort, but he also whipped us hard and put us away wet too. I mean, we all worked hard. It was in his nature. Made my job at Fender a lot easier, or at least the appearance of so. I learned as much as I could. In the early days, what was cool about it is I kind of started with a philosophy that if I hurry up and finish what somebody showed me, they're going to have to show me something else just to keep me busy. Also, what they would do is if we finished our work, you would get to go work in another department. I used to like to work in the graphics department, especially in the wintertime, because that was the only heated room. It was very cold in the wood shop. But also sanding undercoat, all this stuff. Anytime I learned something out of the wood shop, I'd take a chance at it. But mostly, sometimes moving into the fret department or doing binding or things like that,
Yeah, Mike Shannon, Todd came a little bit later on. Mike Shannon came on later on. In the early days, it was just, a real basic crew, and then Tim Wilson came in, and we hired him from Woodworks, which was a furniture manufacturing company, and he didn't know how to build guitars or anything, but we used him for some of his tooling skills, and he helped us make necks and things like that, get to making necks, because at the very, very beginning we were just making bodies, and we were buying necks from Boogie Bodies or Warmoth now, and so once we did that, we started making our own necks and things like that. And then Mike Shannon worked with him at Woodworks, and so he brought Mike Shannon in, and then Todd came in a little bit later after that, and it just kept growing, But the thing that was really interesting about that time is that when Grover was hiring all these, they were basically kids, coming in, and they didn't know how to build guitars. Nobody knew how to build guitars, and Grover would show them how to build guitars, and it was just everybody learned together, and it was a real family, it was neat.
Later, I had another work experience where I had a group of young guys that I worked with, and at that point I kind of realized that one of my skills is cheerleader. I realized that's one of the skills that I somehow innately had, was to be able to take raw material and then push just hard enough to encourage without brutalizing people. and so that they knew that when I yelled at them, it was out of love and because I believed in them and their abilities, not because I was being a prick. But in those days, so you just didn't have the pin on it? Yeah. Which side of the pin are you on?
The best one though is that don't turn the jig the other way, it'll cut too much off that side. The best thing is when I talk to people.
My name's Mike Shannon. I'm Senior Master Builder of Charvel Jackson. In the early days, it was small and like, you know, everybody was, you know, we're all young and wild Indians pretty much, you know, and as far as interfacing with Grover, you know, he'd pop out there and he'd hang out once in a while to see what time we came back in from break and stuff like that. But, I mean, he would always interface with, you know, checking quality or shoving stuff back up your ass if it wasn't right. Typical day, I mean, started at about 7 a.m. and we didn't drink coffee much, but we were wide awake. We would see rock stars probably on a weekly basis. Some of them weren't quite rock stars yet, but then some were big ones. I can remember a couple of times Tommy Lee worked in the industrial complex there, and he'd come in and talk to a bunch of us and tell us party stories, and then Grover'd come in and run him off because he was interrupting production and stuff like that. But there was a lot of stars, a lot of 80s people back at the time. Actually, Tim had worked on the white with the black pinstripe one, and then me and Todd worked on the black with the brass parts and stuff on it. As far as the woodworking end of it went, you know.
How was that?
Well, it was really interesting. I can remember a few things specifically about it as far as getting the headstock shape to what is more typical today's, and also the body shape being smaller. And I know Randy had came in at night and we had cut the body out, and then he even made it a little bit smaller than the original big blank of wood that we had on there, because that was the problem with the first one. It was just too large for him and obviously too heavy, so we had gone to poplar sides on it, on the one that turned into a production guitar.
Did you ever see him when he came in?
Yeah, I saw him. He came in with Grover and walked through the wood shop in there, and I didn't know who he was. You know, didn't really think much of it. It's just another long-haired kid that's, you know, Grover toured through. Later on, we found out who he was, and I think a lot of his popularity actually exploded a bit after the point I had seen him, because I know he came into the shop a few times, but I only had ran into him the one time.
My name's Steven Stern. My current job title is Senior Master Builder at Fender Custom Shop. Yeah, I started working around 1980, the end of 1980, and I worked with Mike Eldred in the setup and assembly area. And my first jobs, we were fret dressing, and the necks back then had an oil finish on them, so we would have to, was a Watco oil, put the oil on and then buff them. And remember, we used to have to mask off the frets so that it wouldn't blacken the wheels, and that was a very tedious job. And that's one of my first jobs in assembly and wiring and that kind of thing.
Well, we went out there, Joanne and I got out there first, and then we had to go to a wood place and buy the wood for the booth. And we had the dimensions all written out, what we were going to do.
That's right,
And then we went in there. You hadn't gotten there yet, or you were doing something else. It was just Joanne and I, and we went to the store. We give the guy the dimensions. We buy the plywood, and then the guy's like, "Okay." And we said, "Well, we need you to cut it like this and this." And these, and we gave him all the dimensions. The guy just, it was the slowest damn thing we've ever seen in our life. You know, the guy just couldn't get it. Finally, it was just like, "Man, let me cut it." And I ended up grabbing the saw and I ended up cutting the stuff. And then we had black drapery material or something like that, and we set that down. And we made the booth.
Stapled it, or what do we do? Stapled it.
Staple it or something.
Yeah.
That was like the
I had-
78 show?
I was hired in 79.
My actual first job was making dots for dot inlay, and then inlaying those dots. I don't know if it's because Mike didn't trust me at first, or just because I didn't know what I was doing, but probably a little bit of both.
Highlights, I mean, there's so many, and it's like 25, 26 years ago now. They're not all fuzzed out, but some of the highlights were when you'd have your tempers going and we'd see guitars hit the wall. I remember a lot of things like that as far as work experiences, and just knowing a lot of the people, for the same people I've known for 26, 27 years now, you know, the same people. We use a lot of the original tooling for the master built stuff because it just doesn't make a lot of sense to try to run stuff on, you know, the CNC equipment. And, you know, when it's a one-off piece, we hand make them. They're still completely handmade. Being involved with the whole Fender organization has actually made it a real company, and I think Fender has done a lot with it as far as making it have a real foundation. I mean, for years and years I was kind of afraid, well, I wonder if how long the doors are going to stay open, different problems. I know it's a completely secure company. There's few worries about what's up tomorrow, you know. It's going to continue on. Grover's impact on me, you know, it started years ago. And even watching him today, because I've stayed friends with him over all the years he wasn't around Jackson and stuff, watching him do things, he's always takes that extra minute for more detail, or figuring out a better way and a more common sense way to do things, or hunting down equipment or tools to do the job correctly. I still see that in him all the time. He was never afraid to spend a buck to do the job right. I use things on a day-to-day basis as far as, you know, some of the methods that we've come up with of how to do things, you know, and how to do things in a timely manner, but at the same time trying to do a really good job. I think it's really cool, you know, because there's going to be 100 guitars. It's usually what the batch numbers are today is 100 pieces, and I mean, if you're a real Charvel collector, I think you're really going to want one.
My official title right now is Director of Sales and Marketing for Fender's Custom Division, and it's a big, long title, and I think it's, you know, sometimes I think it's a ridiculous title because everybody does so much stuff at Fender, you know, and to nail down certain things, what you do is crazy. I mean, I think that I'm blessed to be in the position I'm in. The bottom line is, and I tell everybody this, I've told Grover this millions of times, is that I wouldn't be in the position I'm in without Grover Jackson, because Grover taught me how to build guitars. He taught me how to market guitars. He taught me everything I know, you know. And he's one of the few employers, you know, that would come over to my house for Thanksgiving, you know, and he's just, he showed me and so many other guys in this industry now, people like Steven Stern, Todd Krause, you know, these guys are building guitars for Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck and everything. They learned from Grover Jackson. And so for me personally, I know that I wouldn't have the success that I've had if it wasn't for Grover. Bringing Grover back into the fold is like, it's so exciting for all of us, you know, because he had been apart from Charvel and Jackson for so long, and then to bring him back in and to see the excitement with him and see excitement with Todd and myself and Steven Stern and Mike Shannon, to be able to sit down and go through, like, I mean, we're digging through like old files and stuff and all kinds of, you know, where do we get that material, and how do we do this and how do we do that, and, you know, everybody's kind of excited about going back and relearning how we did stuff, and then just making it again, you know, going in and mixing up the oil that we used on the necks. I mean, that was part of my job back then. And so when I went down there, I mixed all the stuff, all the oil finish that they're doing on the necks now, and it's just exciting, you know. I mean, it's neat to have Grover involved, and everything that we have planned. It's you know, we have all these ideas planned and all these things in place that we're going to be doing for 2007, 2008, and beyond. It's just exciting right now. I think that it's a real exciting time for Grover. It's an exciting time for Charvel, Jackson, Fender, everybody that's involved. You know, so I think it's a really, really neat experience to be able to go back, and in a lot of ways we're giving a lot of the stuff that Grover gave us, we're giving back to him now. So it's kind of cool that on that level too.
Well, it's very rewarding that all of these guys that have gone on to have real careers started with me. You have to understand this was a bunch of young guys. We were all just a bunch of young guys in a building pursuing something that we loved. Well, I'm very excited to be a part of this. The guys have matured now to the point where they and I have chops that we dreamed about when we were young. The tools and the things that we need to be able to create our visions now exist. Yeah, Fender. What's so exciting about today is that we were very limited in our tools and what we could afford and what was available technology-wise in the past. And those tools are available today, and Fender's shown a tremendous willingness to invest in a dream, which is what Jackson Charvel has always been, is a passion and a dream for a better guitar.
But this is still one of the best playing guitars I have.